Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. With Red Bull starting to slow their rated development of the RB19 down and Mercedes bringing major upgrades in Silverstone in a couple of weeks' time, Aston Martin also believe their car will be at the same pace as the Red Bull in very short order. They reckon their new updates with some tweaks can get them to the same pace within just a few weeks and sets up hopefully a far more interesting second half of the season than many predicted. Very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Get like 300 subs in the last few days. Love to see it. Max Verstappen's dominating this season, and let's not forget, he has currently led 224 laps in a row since lap 48 of the Miami Grand Prix. He is not far away of breaking some of the all-time records of Mansell, Senna, and then Alberto Ascari led 4 consecutive Grand Prix. Verstappen's now done 3 consecutive Grand Prix, all in the lead. So let's not pretend that Max and the Red Bull isn't dominating right now, but the other teams are definitely getting closer. Max is clearly very valuable to the Red Bull, and without him driving at that insanely high consistent level, they wouldn't be winning all these races. Perez is struggling over the last few. We're not getting the Red Bull 1-2s that we were right at the start of the season regularly, and without Max, the championship would be really interesting, and the other cars are closing it on Max. His advantage has been minimised over the last few races to such an extent that Helmut Marko says, look, this Nürburgring show run that Danny, Rick and Vettel are doing in September, he said, Max, you're not doing that. We know how Max is. First, he would have checked what the record was and would then have tried to beat it. And in those cars, those old Red Bulls with no halo or anything, and at the Nürburgring at Nordschleife, it's pretty dangerous. So Helmut Marko has effectively said, no, you're not doing that one, Max. But this is what Ferrari say. They had a better weekend by their standards. Their pace was pretty good in quali, but they just bottled it, to be honest. I mean, the whole Inter's soft thing. They had a bad start. They had a good strategy, can you believe? And they finished P4, P5. Pretty respectable, all things considered, and they apparently gained an extra 2 to 3 tenths of a second per lap this weekend just on further understanding of their new package that they brought in Spain. And this is the key point. When teams bring a brand new update, often they don't extract the full potential of it straight away. It takes them a couple of weekends to really understand, okay, how do we set up the car with this new package to maximize its potential? Same with Red Bull. When they brought their package to Baku, it was really in Miami we got to see what it was fully capable of, and a similar story with Mercedes. In Monaco they looked all right, but they came to Spain, optimized it more, gained more time. Similar thing now for Ferrari. They brought the upgrade package in Spain, they bring it to Canada, understand it better with all the tyre testing they got to do after Spain, and gain 2-3 tenths of a second out of the package that was there but they weren't able to previously extract. And if Aston Martin can do the same on their recent upgrades, that will make things very interesting indeed. Mercedes are incredibly optimistic about their future in the coming months. Toto Wolff even saying that the package in Silverstone is effectively the largest one yet for how he thinks it's going to affect their car, and says that because they're understanding the car better, they're actually now taking bigger steps. Because we're seeing good performance gains in the tunnel, we're seeing better what the car needs in order to go faster, so they can actually make bigger progress now than they were a couple of months ago when they were first starting to really understand this concept. And he even said, Toto Wolff, that basically the journalist in Viaplay here says, if I say you're going to win a race guaranteed, what circuit's that going to be? And I thought he might have said Brazil, maybe, where they won last year, right at the end of the year, when maybe the Mercedes has caught up to the Red Bull type thing. But he says Silverstone, which, he says it quite confidently.
If I say you're going to win a race this year, which circuit will that be on?
Silverstone.
And okay, sure, home Grand Prix for their drivers, for their team effectively, right? They would like to win there, I'm sure. And their car was pretty good there last year. And I think even James Vowell said before this season even began that even the W14 original spec was going to be pretty good at Silverstone, even if they didn't change the concept they have over the past couple of months. But the idea that Toto Wolff is confident that in a few weeks' time they could theoretically win a race is maybe surprising, because I would have thought Mercedes expected it to be at least another 3-4 months until they could realistically hope to challenge for wins. But Toto Wolff reckons start of July, that's a chance. But if Mercedes are confident, Aston Martin are positively brimming with excitement about the potential of their car. Alonso has been everywhere. It's kind of rare that I actually mention a driver tweet on this channel, but at least on the Formula 1 channel. But you guys know that when Hamilton came out and Alonso did the whole thing with a wheel to pretend that he was, being impeded, let's just say, and then Toto Wolff kind of mocks it, right, in this and what happened here. We actually then got Alonso replying to this, the that got, 73 odd thousand likes. So Alonso was going wild on Twitter yesterday, replying to all this type of stuff. But even Red Bull said themselves that the competition was closer in Canada. They say, Red Bull, they didn't have the perfect weekend. They've got to do better as other teams start to close up. And it was the closest gap of any driver, any other car, let's say, to a Red Bull so far this season. And that was Alonso managing a problem which actually wasn't a problem. They thought they had issues with fuel, which was definitely surprising because when there's a safety car, often the teams will underfuel the cars, right? Because they don't want to carry extra fuel if they don't have to. So they would prefer to put less fuel in the car, maybe get the driver to do some fuel saving over the race. But if there's a safety car, that obviously reduces fuel consumption because you're not driving flat out. So usually when there's a safety car, that eliminates any fuel concerns on the grid. So it was surprising to me that Alonso was being asked to manage this. And for roughly 45 laps, he had to do a bit of lift and coast. Lift and coast is you get to the end of a straight, instead of just going straight off the accelerator and bang onto the brake, you effectively lift off the throttle and just coast the car for maybe a couple of tenths of a second or something, just to save that little bit of fuel that adds up over time. The analysis shows, though, that Alonso was losing, at least towards the end of the race, roughly 0.2 of a second per lap. So, okay, 0.2 of a second per lap, 45 laps, multiply those together, that's 9 seconds of race time lost, theoretically, for the lift and coast. And his finishing behind Verstappen, it was roughly 10 seconds. Now, I don't think he would have realistically been able to catch and overtake Verstappen, but I do think that without managing this problem, that actually wasn't a problem after all, because they realised that they didn't have an issue, but they were asking him to do the lift and coast, they would have been much closer. He wouldn't have had any threat from Hamilton at the end of the race. There was clearly a lot of pace in that Aston Martin at that specific circuit, and even as Mike Crack says, despite a lot of lift and coast, the pace was still excellent. So the analysis says that maybe earlier on in the race it was maybe 0.1 of a second, and towards the end it was 0.2. But even if we say that Alonso lost, 5-6 seconds of total race time because of this issue, he would have finished right behind Verstappen, right on his tail. And a small mistake from Verstappen, might have spelled an actual Alonso victory here, right? So they were very competitive. And, okay, Mike Crack says, I think we could have gone a little faster. I don't think it would have been enough to beat Red Bull, but it wasn't far away. And even Alonso says, in terms of pace, we were on par with the Red Bulls, which is the first time we've ever seen that this season. So Alonso was on average 17/100th of a second behind Verstappen per lap. If you include the potential fuel saving thing, Alonso would have been right there or thereabouts. And yes, Verstappen did have the bird in the duct, right, in the brake duct, I'm pretty sure it was. That was maybe costing him some time, but I think people looked into the data, and actually the lap that he hit the bird, he did like a 1:17.2 or something, and the next lap after he hit the bird, he did a 1:17.1. So it didn't really seem to be affecting his performance, the bird lodged in the brake duct. So it's pretty exciting stuff. And then you get a further follow-up where Aston Martin believe that even with this current package they have with some optimization based on the data from their wind tunnel and simulations, they can match Red Bull's pace. That's what they believe. And that's pretty much with these upgrades they've brought, right? And it might be the same as what we discussed with Ferrari earlier on. They brought the upgrades. Are these upgrades on the Aston Martin optimized? Can they get another 1/10, 2/10, 3/10 even out of these upgrades if they really nail the setup at other circuits such as Austria? That's a possibility, and it makes things really interesting. There's also further updates for these guys at the British Grand Prix in Silverstone that they believe can close the remaining gap. So it's pretty crazy. Mercedes, we saw yesterday, are thinking that they might be one upgrade away from Red Bull, and Aston Martin say they're one upgrade away from Red Bull, or even potentially on some tracks, just an optimization of their current setup away from Red Bull, which definitely didn't feel like it would be the case at the start of the season, right? Red Bull finished 38 seconds ahead in Bahrain of the nearest car, a 1-2 by an absolute mile. The idea that we're roughly halfway through the season and Aston Martin and Mercedes and maybe Ferrari on certain tracks are confident they can actually be competitive is very interesting. Now, let's not pretend that Red Bull haven't got the championship sewn up. Verstappen's going to win the drivers, Red Bull are going to win the constructors. I think it would be shocking to predict otherwise. But the chance of Perez finishing P2 in the championship, the drivers, is now reducing significantly in likelihood with these other cars catching up to the Red Bull's pace and Alonso and Hamilton frankly just being superior drivers. So let's not get the hopes up too much of a cracking second half of the season. Red Bull will still bring some new things. They've said said that there's a new floor coming for Red Bull. They've probably got another couple of tenths they can unlock from this car, what they want to do this season. But they won't bring that much more. They've got to think about the wind tunnel testing time penalty. They've got to think, all right, we've got to abandon this car at some point to go to next year. And maybe that means that Red Bull again are going to start ahead of the field next year and the penalty was all for naught, as we talked about earlier on today. But does it mean that we're going to get some fantastic races at the end of this season? Hopefully that's the case. If we can actually get Aston Martin on Red Bull's pace, Mercedes on Red Bull's pace in 4 or 5 races time, we could have some really exciting racing. And I think, to be honest, Verstappen wants a bit of a challenge as well. So honestly, at this point, all the optimism that comes from Aston Martin, you've got to just say fair play, because I, at the start of the season, said, all right, Aston Martin, I'm going to predict them to come 4th in the championship, right? Because I thought they are going to deliver on this promise, but I couldn't realistically see them overtaking Mercedes and Ferrari. But it looks like they're going to do it. At least one of those two teams they're going to beat here in the constructors, you would think. Probably Ferrari, especially if Stroll can up his game. And when they say there's upgrades coming to the Aston, they actually arrive and they actually work. Can you believe it? Like, they said there was big upgrades in Canada. They actually delivered. Alonso was not far at all off the pace. And now they're saying that in a few races' time, they're going to be at the Red Bull's pace, at least at the pace of the current Red Bull, that Red Bull could again move ahead if they bring some new things. But yeah, man, really exciting time. And if Red Bull do start to fall back into that situation and Perez is quite often finishing, let's just say, 6th as he did in Canada, then questions are being raised around the possibility of Daniel Ricciardo, who actually mentions here just over the last day or so that the fairy tale ending for his career would be to drive at Red Bull and finish his career there. Apparently he's also open to the prospect of racing at Alfa Tauri if they were to get rid of Nick de Vries, and that's actually a very realistic possibility. So, you know, maybe Ricciardo thinks that's the way to prove his stock back into Formula 1. But then again, if Perez was to be doing so bad they wanted to get rid of him, is there many better options than Ricciardo available for them? Maybe Tsunoda, but I feel like it might still be a little bit early for him at Red Bull. Maybe Liam Lawson, but I think you want to try him a little bit, first of all, in the AlphaTauri. Maybe Lando Norris, but I'm not sure that Red Bull want to do that given Verstappen's #1 status. I think Danny Rick's actually a reasonable option in that case, and maybe it's becoming increasingly likely, but very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.